Your stomach often knows something before your mind does. Before you can explain why you're nervous, you feel butterflies in your stomach. Before you admit you're worried, your appetite changes. Before you recognize how overwhelmed you are, you may find yourself reaching for food even when you're not hungry. Or perhaps the opposite. You suddenly lose interest in eating altogether. It's interesting, isn't it? We tend to think of stress as something that happens in the mind, but very often the body notices first. And one of the places it speaks most clearly is the stomach. Today, researchers talk about the gut-brain connection. Some even refer to the gut as a second brain. And while the science continues to evolve, most of us don't need a scientific study to know that our emotions and our stomach are connected. We've lived it, we've felt it, we've experienced it for ourselves. Long before people were talking about the gut-brain connection, traditional Reiki practitioners were observing something remarkably similar. The language was different, but the experience was the same. People carrying worry, people carrying stress, people carrying emotional burdens, and often feeling it here in the stomach. So I'd like to share what traditional Reiki understands about this connection and why sometimes the first step toward balance begins not in the mind, but in the body. Today, people talk a lot about the gut-brain connection. The idea that what happens in the mind can affect what happens in the digestive system, and that what happens in the digestive system can influence how we feel emotionally. The science behind that connection is fascinating. But for most of us, we don't need to understand all the research to recognize that the connection exists. We've experienced it. Think about how your eating habits change when you're stressed. Perhaps you lose your appetite. Perhaps you find yourself craving certain foods. Perhaps you eat more quickly than usual. Or perhaps you find yourself standing in front of the fridge, not because you're hungry, but because you're looking for something else. Comfort, distraction, relief. Sometimes we aren't feeding the body. We are trying to soothe something else. And there is no judgment in that. It's simply part of being human. I know, I've seen this in my own life. There have been times when I found myself reaching for food whenever there was something I didn't want to do. Not because I was hungry, but because eating was easier than facing whatever discomfort was sitting underneath. And perhaps you've experienced something similar. What's interesting is that our stomach often notices these things before our mind does, before we can put words to our stress, before we admit we are worried, before we acknowledge that something feels heavy. The body has already begun the conversation. And one of the places that conversation often shows up is in the stomach, which may be why so many traditions, including Reiki, pay attention to this area of the body. Not because the stomach is the problem, but because sometimes it is the messenger. Long before people were talking about the gut-brain connection, Reiki practitioners were paying attention to something remarkably simple. When people are worried, they often place their hands on their stomach. Think about it for a moment. When you're waiting for important news, when you're feeling anxious, when you're carrying a difficult decision, how often do your hands naturally find their way here? Not because someone taught you to do it, not because you've studied Reiki, but because it feels instinctive. It's as though the body already knows where our attention is needed. Over the years, I've noticed something similar when working with students. People often describe carrying stress in their shoulders, carrying tension in their jaw. But very often, they also describe carrying something in the stomach, a knot, a heaviness, a tightness, a feeling that something doesn't quite sit right. Traditional Reiki encourages us to pay attention to these experiences, not because the stomach is necessarily the problem, but because sometimes it is the messenger. The body is often communicating something the mind hasn't fully acknowledged yet. And when we take the time to listen, we may begin to notice what we've been carrying: stress, worry, frustration, fear, or simply the demands of everyday life. Some Reiki practitioners may also consider whether Jaki is present. I've recently made an entire video about Jaki, which I'll link above if you'd like to learn more about it. In that video, I describe Jaki as a Japanese concept often understood as heavy or stagnant energy around a person or within a space. While today's video isn't specifically about Jaki, it's another example of how Reiki encourages us to pay attention to what may be affecting our well-being. Whether the source is stress, worry, an overwhelming environment, or something else entirely, Reiki invites us to begin in the same place. Not by fixing, not by judging, not by analyzing, but by noticing. And when we do, we often discover that the body has been speaking to us all along. So rather than continuing to talk about the connection between stress and the stomach, I'd like to invite you to experience something for yourself. If you're driving or doing something that requires your attention, you can simply listen. But if you're somewhere comfortable, perhaps you can join me. There is nothing you need to achieve, nothing you need to feel, nothing you need to do perfectly. Just follow along as best as you can. Let's begin by placing one or both hands on the upper abdomen, just below the rib cage. This area is sometimes called the solar plexus. Allow your hands to rest there comfortably. Take a slow, natural breath. And then another. You don't need to change anything. Just notice. Notice the contact of your hands. Notice your breathing. Notice what is present. Perhaps there is tension. Perhaps there is softness. Perhaps there is nothing in particular at all. All of those experiences are welcome. As you rest your hands here, you might gently ask yourself, what have I been carrying lately? Not as a problem to solve, not as something to analyze, just a simple question. And then listen. Now, if it feels comfortable, bring your hands to the lower abdomen. In traditional Japanese Reiki, this area is often called the Tanden. It is considered the body's center, a place associated with grounding, stability, and presence. Allow your hands to rest comfortably here. Take another slow breath. and simply notice. Notice the weight of your body. Notice your breathing. Notice the support beneath you. For a moment, allow yourself to set everything down. The things you need to do, the decisions you need to make, the conversations you're replaying in your mind. Just for this moment, allow yourself to be here. What we've done together is very simple. No special equipment, no complicated techniques. Just a few moments of attention, a few moments of touch, a few moments of listening. And sometimes that's enough to help us notice what we've been carrying and what we're ready to let go of. If you'd like to explore this practice further, I'll link some of our guided Reiki self-healing sessions above and in the description below. One of the reasons I find this area of the body so interesting is that it often reveals habits we don't even realize we have. For example, have you ever found yourself eating when you're not actually hungry? Not because your body needs food, but because you're avoiding something. A task you don't want to do, a difficult conversation, an uncomfortable feeling. I know I've done that. There have been times when I found myself reaching for food simply because it felt easier than facing whatever was underneath. And I suspect I'm not alone. Sometimes we aren't feeding the body. We're trying to soothe something else. Again, there's no judgment in that. It's simply something we can notice. And that noticing in itself can be powerful. I also think about how differently I relate to food today compared to years ago. When I was living alone, I would often eat dinner in front of the television. It was almost automatic. I wasn't really appreciating the meal. I wasn't fully paying attention to the show. I was simply eating. The food disappeared, the program ended, and I moved on with my evening. But these days, my experience is often very different. Sometimes I have breakfast by myself, and it has become one of my favorite parts of the day. A quiet moment, a peaceful moment, a moment that's entirely my own. Every now and then, I think about putting on a video or scrolling through something while I eat. But then I realize that if I do that, I stop appreciating the meal itself. I stop noticing the taste, the texture, the care that went into preparing it. And so more often than not, I simply enjoy the food. Not because someone told me I should, but because I've come to appreciate the experience of being present with it. To me, that's one of the gifts of Reiki. It doesn't just change what we do, it changes how we relate to what we're doing. Eating becomes less automatic. Breathing becomes less automatic. Life becomes less automatic. And perhaps that's why paying attention to the stomach matters. Not because we are trying to fix digestion, but because this area often reminds us when we are drifting away from ourselves. And sometimes all it takes is a moment of awareness to begin finding our way back. Your stomach knows before your mind does. Long before we can explain what's happening. Long before. Your stomach knows before your mind does. Long before we can explain what's happening. Long before we can put words to it. the body is often already speaking through tension, through appetite, through discomfort, through a simple feeling that something isn't quite right. And perhaps one of the greatest lessons Reiki offers is this: the body is not working against you. The body is trying to communicate with you. Not every sensation needs to be analyzed. Not every feeling needs to be fixed. Sometimes the invitation is simply to listen, to place your hands on yourself, to become still, and to notice what has been there all along. This is one of the reasons self-healing is such an important part of traditional Reiki practice. Before we learn to support others, Reiki invites us to listen to others. Not because we are selfish, but because awareness begins here, with our own body, with our own experience, with our own willingness to pay attention. The goal isn't perfect digestion. The goal isn't never feeling stress. The goal isn't to eliminate every uncomfortable feeling. The goal is to recognize when you've drifted away from yourself and to have a way to return again and again. Perhaps that's what your stomach has been trying to tell you all along. Not that something is wrong, but that something needs your attention. If this is your first time here, welcome. On this channel, we explore traditional Japanese Reiki and practical ways to bring more awareness, balance, and connection into everyday life. If that resonates with you, I'd love to have you subscribe and join us. And if you'd like to learn more, you'll find links below to the Japan Reiki Association, guided self-healing practices, and the video I mentioned about Jaki. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, sometimes the body notices first. ありがとうございます。